I thought I'd found the perfect quiet neighborhood until I encountered Linda. She's the type of person who believes she controls the entire street, complete with her fabricated community regulations and pseudo-security teams acting like they own the territory. Unfortunately for her, she had no clue who she was dealing with. I'm a federal agent who doesn't tolerate intimidation lightly. What unfolded next caught her completely off guard. I was jolted awake by aggressive banging on my front door, so violent it made my windows vibrate. Still groggy, I rushed to the entrance thinking someone might need emergency help. Peering through the peephole, I spotted two individuals wearing identical outfits with bold lettering reading, Community Security Force. Their badges appeared cheaply made, resembling costume accessories, yet they stood rigidly with intimidating expressions. Opening the door partially, I asked, "How can I assist you?" The larger guard, a man with angular features, gestured toward me. "We're conducting official business. Your residence has several infractions and we must examine your storage area." Irritation surged through me. Infractions? There's nothing in my garage violating any legitimate rules. The smaller guard, a woman with piercing eyes, snapped back, "Don't complicate this. We're authorized by the community board." I noticed they mentioned no warrants or actual police involvement. Calmly, I stated, "I'm a federal agent. If you have valid grounds, present proper documentation." The tall guard smirked. "Being federal doesn't exempt you from neighborhood standards." Behind them, I noticed movement. Linda, my neighbor, peered over their shoulders with a self-satisfied expression. She'd always been domineering and argumentative, nitpicking every minor detail in our area. I immediately knew she'd orchestrated this charade. Stepping outside, I maintained composure. "Linda, what's happening here?" She lifted her chin defiantly. "I'm simply ensuring regulations are maintained," she said with false sweetness. "You can't claim immunity because of your profession." The fake guards nodded. "We've received complaints about unusual activities in your garage," the woman stated. I laughed tensely. "Unusual activities? Such as?" Linda shrugged. "I've heard sounds late at night. Could be anything. Perhaps you're storing dangerous materials or planning something suspicious." My jaw clenched. "That's ridiculous and you know it. If there's a genuine issue, I'll cooperate. But this is harassment." The tall guard produced a document that looked like a typed notice. No official seal, no signature, just text claiming I was under community security investigation. "This isn't legitimate documentation. You have no authority to enter." Linda sighed dramatically. "Are you sure you want to resist? I can include your noncompliance in the violation report." I glared at her. "Since when does the community board deploy security forces? I've lived here long enough to know we only have volunteers checking landscaping and exterior colors." The shorter guard flashed a plastic-looking badge. "We have expanded authority now." "Step aside." I shook my head firmly. "Absolutely not. Return with real law enforcement and a valid warrant, or you're not entering my property." The man stepped closer. "Don't challenge us." My anger spiked, but I controlled it. As a federal agent, I knew better than to escalate physically on my doorstep. Instead, I crossed my arms. "If you attempt unauthorized entry, you'll face criminal charges." Linda smirked again. "You can't threaten us. Everyone here knows you think you're above community standards." Suddenly, my phone vibrated. Seeing my supervisor's name, my stomach tightened. I'd never received such an early call from him. "One moment," I told the fake guards, retreating inside. The tall man shouted, "This isn't finished." Ignoring him, I answered. My supervisor's voice sounded strained. "Report to headquarters immediately. We have a situation." My heart sank. "Is this regarding complaints about me?" After a pause, he said, "I'll explain in person." I hung up and returned to the door. The two imposters remained with Linda, hovering behind them possessively. "I need to leave for work," I announced. "I'll address this later." The woman guard shook her head. "If you depart, we'll document you as uncooperative." Linda stepped forward, her stare cold. "Want your neighbors witnessing you flee?" I sighed. "Linda, this is absurd. You know you can't detain me." She tilted her head. "I'm not detaining you, they are. And I won't intervene." The male guard raised plastic restraints as if planning to bind me. Reminding myself to stay calm, I said, "Lower those. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. You understand that, correct?" The woman grabbed her radio, though I doubted it connected to any real dispatch. Linda clicked her tongue. "You might want to listen. They have authority to cite you." My jaw clenched. A fake citation is worthless. The tall man waved the restraints menacingly. Want to test if these are fake too? At that moment I realized how far this had escalated. They wanted to provoke me into rash action. It was clearly a trap. I forced myself to step back, breathing slowly. Look, I'm leaving to handle urgent federal business. You need to vacate my property. Linda shrugged. We'll be monitoring. The community board has oversight. That made me laugh. The real community board might, but you certainly aren't representing it. The male guard pressed his lips thin. Final warning. He glanced at Linda, who nodded. If you don't comply, we'll recommend disciplinary measures. I glared at them. Recommend it to whoever you want. Now leave my property. They retreated, but not before the woman photographed me with her phone. Linda gave me a mocking smile. Say cheese for the records, my stomach churned. I waited for them to leave my lawn, then slammed the door. My phone buzzed again with another message from my supervisor. Hurry. My entire body felt tense like a coiled spring. This was exactly what I didn't need, especially with something serious happening at headquarters. These phony guards had thrown my morning into turmoil, and Linda's smug grin haunted my thoughts. It took 10 minutes to collect myself before grabbing my keys and departing. The fake patrol car sat at the street's end, lights dark. I noticed Linda's vehicle was gone, meaning she might be elsewhere, probably spreading her twisted version of events to other neighbors. Driving away, I tried steadying my breathing. My supervisor's urgent tone had sounded dire, rattling me more than Linda's theatrics. As I merged onto the main road, I kept checking my mirror, half expecting that community security car to tail me, but saw no sign of them. Still, I felt trapped between two crises, the phony guards wanting to corner me at home and something ominous looming at work. I reached federal headquarters and headed inside. My supervisor stood in the corridor looking rigid and worried. You took long enough, he snapped, then waved me into his office. I closed the door behind us, my heart racing. He demanded to know why local authorities were complaining about my threatening behavior. I explained the situation, emphasizing how those guards had no real credentials and that Linda orchestrated it. He stared at me silently. We have a problem. Higher-ups have flagged this. There's talk of misconduct, and I can't shield you if it escalates. My stomach dropped, but I'm innocent. Someone's framing me, or at least trying to force me out. He rubbed his temples. I don't care if they're real security or not. There's documentation claiming you resisted a lawful inspection. It's all nonsense, but it's on my desk now. Anger flushed up my neck. Linda must have submitted it. She's executing some twisted scheme, he sighed heavily. Like I said, I can't do much if official complaints keep arriving. Stay composed. Prove they're fraudulent. Otherwise, you'll face an internal investigation. Panic flared. But I nodded, knowing there was no quick solution. Leaving his office, my phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. Better watch your actions. We know your identity. I nearly crushed my phone. These people were attempting to destroy my life, and now they'd found ways to make it appear official. I struggled through the day, haunted by the morning's confrontation and the sinking realization that Linda had elevated her petty power games to a dangerous new level. Some colleagues shot me odd looks as if they'd already heard rumors. Before leaving for home, I stopped by the break room where Agent Martinez pulled me aside. Got a minute? He asked quietly. Sure, I replied. He glanced around, ensuring privacy. I overheard something. Word is you're in hot water. You might want to be careful. My chest tightened. Careful here or in my neighborhood? Martinez frowned. Both, possibly. And I'd watch that Linda woman. She's boasting about getting you in trouble. By the time I left headquarters, the sun was setting. I drove home with frayed nerves, wondering if those fake guards would return to my street. Turning onto my block, I spotted a suspicious SUV parked near my house. Its tinted windows made me uneasy. I parked and eyed the SUV, but the engine was off and no one emerged. Keeping my breathing steady, I hurried inside, locked the door, and closed the curtains. Almost immediately, my phone chimed with an email notification from the Bureau's internal affairs team, asking me to explain my morning altercation with the local security detail. I collapsed onto my sofa in disbelief. Linda had managed to link her phony patrol with real authorities, putting my career at risk. Even though the so-called community security guards had left my house earlier, they still lurked in my neighborhood, while the Bureau pressed me for answers. With Linda stirring up trouble at every opportunity, I sensed the storm around me was intensifying, and I had no idea how far her scheme would reach. I returned home later that day and saw the same fake community security cruiser idling at my street's end. My pulse accelerated as I parked, but I forced myself to appear normal. Once inside, I peeked through the blinds. The car remained stationary, as if challenging me to confront it again. I checked my messages, hoping for a response from the real community board, or some sign that Linda's hoax was crumbling. Instead, I found only a bounced email and a threatening voicemail. The distorted voice warned, "We know you're investigating. Stop or this escalates." That single message told me Linda wasn't working alone in this plot. The next day, I attempted calling the official community board number listed on an old newsletter, but my call went directly to a recorded message about technical difficulties. Frustrated, I sent an email titled "Urgent, Possible Impersonation," only to have it bounce back as undeliverable. I even checked the neighborhood website, which showed outdated information and no mention of any new security measures. It seemed Linda had blocked every communication channel, leaving me without official recourse. I decided to contact Officer Rodriguez, a straightforward police contact who occasionally shared intelligence with the Bureau. Over the phone, I summarized the situation: fake badges, bogus citations, and a neighbor orchestrating the scheme. Rodriguez sounded skeptical but promised to investigate the license plate of the so-called community security vehicle. If it belongs to a private security company, they can't legally act as law enforcement, he said. As I waited for Rodriguez's callback, tension in my neighborhood continued escalating. Neighbors I'd barely known before now whispered behind their fences, eyeing me like I was the troublemaker. One morning, Maria, one of the few people still talking to me, knocked on my door looking pale and frantic. "They left this on my porch," she said, holding up a notice demanding payment for unapproved exterior colors. I skimmed the text and recognized the same phony language they'd targeted me with, threatening forced removal if she didn't pay. She looked ready to cry. I called the community board for help, but the line was disconnected. "Is Linda even allowed to do this?" My anger flared. "No, this is a scam. Don't pay them. I'll resolve this." But she only shrugged, fear in her eyes. "I can't risk losing my home. If nobody's stopping them, then maybe it's legitimate." Meanwhile, work at headquarters became a minefield. My supervisor called me in for an update, his voice tight with frustration. "I'm receiving more reports of your conflicts with local authorities," he said, tapping a folder on his desk. "Care to explain?" I did my best to detail Linda's phony guards and showed him the worthless citations they'd issued me, but he frowned and shrugged. "If they claim to be private security, I can't make all this disappear. Higher-ups are asking questions and they're not satisfied." That left me feeling cornered. Even if the so-called community security force were fraudulent, the disturbance they created was echoing at headquarters. I couldn't afford more trouble. Every day I worried about an email or call informing me I was officially under investigation. One evening I spotted Linda standing in her driveway, arms folded as she watched me pull in. I stepped out of my car and marched directly to her, ignoring the nervous flutter in my stomach. "We need to talk," I said. She merely raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." I kept my tone controlled. "You've sicked these fake guards on me and now you're targeting innocent neighbors. Why?" She flashed a thin smile. "It's not personal. People here forget we have standards. I'm just ensuring we enforce them." I clenched my fists. "By terrorizing everyone?" "That's not how communities work." She shrugged. "They don't seem terrorized to me. They pay the fines. They follow rules. Life continues." My anger simmered. "What's your end game?" She tilted her head as though puzzled by my question. "End game? I'm just improving the neighborhood. You're the one refusing to cooperate." Before I could respond, one of the fake guards approached, giving me a stern look. "Move along," he ordered. "We have business with Miss Linda." My jaw tightened. "You have no legal authority here." He lifted a flimsy badge and smirked. "We're all the authority we need." Rather than argue, I stepped back, not wanting to give them another excuse to file a complaint. Linda shot me a final smug glance before they walked off together, leaving me fuming in the street. That night I tried to calm down by reviewing old community board documents from my filing cabinet. I found a reference to a once proposed security program that never got approved. Linda's name was listed as a main advocate. The plan had been shelved when residents decided they didn't want a militaristic presence in the neighborhood. Now it seemed she'd created her own version using any means necessary. A deep chill ran down my spine. If she could hijack an entire community, maybe she had connections in high places too. Connections who could create real trouble for me at headquarters. A few days later, Rodriguez finally called back. "That plate belongs to a private security outfit, but I can't find any licensing agreement with your community board," he said, sounding more certain now. "They're operating without approval," I exhaled in relief. "This proves they're not real security. But how do I tie it to Linda?" He hesitated. "I can't investigate further unless there's an official complaint on file. And so far there isn't." My frustration boiled over. "This is an official complaint. I'm telling you, they threatened me on my property." Rodriguez sighed. "I believe you. But I need statements from other neighbors who will support you. Otherwise, it's your word against theirs." I realized then how carefully Linda had cultivated fear. No one wanted to oppose her, especially if they risked facing these pseudo-guards. That meant I was alone unless I could build an ironclad case. Meanwhile, headquarters grew more impatient. A supervisor from Internal Affairs summoned me to a brief meeting. She asked pointed questions about my aggressive behavior with local authorities, referencing a typed report full of half-truths. I stated my side, but she simply tapped her pen on the folder and said, "We're reviewing all angles." My chest felt tight as I left her office. Even if I was telling the truth, the repeated complaints made me look like a liability. Linda was winning this round, using her phony enforcers and fake citations to undermine my credibility. My only comfort was that Maria still believed me, though she was too frightened to speak up formally. Just when I thought things couldn't worsen, I found an envelope taped to my front door. It bore a counterfeit community board seal, and inside was a notice claiming I'd violated Community Ordinance 301. The penalty, a substantial fine or further corrective measures. My patience snapped. I slammed the envelope on my kitchen table and called Linda's number, leaving a furious voicemail demanding she stop her harassment. An hour later, my phone buzzed. The number was blocked. "Don't threaten Linda again," a voice hissed. "We know your supervisor and we can make your life difficult." The line went dead before I could speak. Rage coiled in my gut as I realized these people were well connected, or at least wanted me to believe they were. Late that night, I peered out my window at the quiet street. Porch lights glimmered and a breeze rustled across neatly trimmed lawns. If anyone glanced over, they'd see a picture-perfect suburb. But I felt trapped in a twisted game with Linda pulling the strings. I was no closer to proving her scam, and the clock was ticking on my federal career. My phone chimed with an email from a colleague. "Heads up. Internal review might launch soon. Rumors are circulating." Another storm on the horizon, and I was still stuck battling a neighbor who'd found a frightening way to seize power. As I turned off my lights, I couldn't help but wonder what Linda's next move would be, and whether I'd stand any chance once she made it. Even though I'd discovered the private security connection, I still had no solid proof tying Linda to the scheme or clearing my name at headquarters. My only lead was the plate number Rodriguez traced, but without neighbors brave enough to step forward, I stood on unstable ground, and Linda was ready to push me over the edge. Tension clung to my every move, and the stress of being under scrutiny at headquarters only intensified my fear of Linda's next strike. Whenever I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, sometimes from neighbors who'd turned suspicious, sometimes from that unmarked car lurking at the corner. Late one afternoon, I headed out to buy groceries, hoping a quick errand would clear my head. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed a figure behind Linda's hedge, possibly keeping watch. The realization that my own neighborhood had become enemy territory made my stomach knot. Halfway to the store, my phone buzzed with an unknown caller. I hesitated, then answered. A gravelly voice said, "Stop investigating or else." Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me with an uneasy chill in my chest. After the grocery run, I returned home to find a crumpled flyer jammed under my wiper. It read, "Community security volunteers needed," listing a meeting date and Linda's address. So she was recruiting more help now, luring neighbors into her web of phony authority. The bottom mentioned a membership fee to cover uniform costs. I shuddered at how blatant it was. If even a handful of people fell for her pitch, She'd have an entire squad of intimidating enforcers roaming the block. I photographed the flyer for evidence, then tore it up, not wanting it to blow around my yard. As I walked up my steps, I noticed the blinds in Linda's window shift slightly. She was probably watching me, but I didn't care. I shut my front door and bolted it tight. Inside, I spread my scattered notes on the dining table, trying to build a timeline of her takeover. There were dozens of warnings, fines, and bogus citations. Some were directed at me, others Maria had shared. A pattern emerged. Each piece looked like a stepping stone, systematically dismantling normal community board processes until Linda could claim everything ran through her. She'd created a vacuum of confusion, then filled it with her own fabricated structure. The question was why, or more importantly, who else stood behind her? The voice on the phone that kept warning me didn't sound like any neighbor I recognized. It had a menace that suggested real muscle, and that meant someone with resources had her back. That evening, I invited Maria over so we could piece together what we knew. She arrived with a thick envelope of her own documents. I found old newsletters that mentioned Linda taking over the events committee, she said, sitting down at my table. At the time, we thought she just wanted to manage block parties and yard sales. Now I see she had bigger goals. I flipped through some of the pages, shaking my head in disbelief. It's like she's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment. Maria's hands trembled as she pointed out a line from a 6-month-old letter. Local security guidelines will be enforced for the safety of all residents. It bore Linda's signature along with a vague reference to third-party officials. Maria placed her hand over mine. Do you think any part of this is legal? She asked, voice tight with worry. I shook my head. No, but nobody's stopping her. We shared a grim look. Even the real community board was out of the picture, either silent or forced into hiding, and the police wouldn't act without clear evidence of criminal wrongdoing. As for headquarters, I was stuck behind layers of internal reviews. The next day, I decided to visit Rodriguez in person. Maybe if I showed him the collected documents, he'd see the scope of Linda's plot. I drove to the station, the flyer and citations stacked in a manila folder on my passenger seat. My heart pounded in my chest, worried that someone might follow me. At a stoplight, I spotted a black sedan with tinted windows behind me. It lingered too long when the light turned green, raising my suspicions. Once I reached the station and parked, the sedan slowed, then turned down a side street. My pulse hammered, convinced I'd just been tailed. Inside, Rodriguez ushered me into a cramped office. Sorry for the mess, he said. We're short on space right now. I placed the folder on his desk and explained everything. The calls, the flyers, the brand new push for more fake guards, the rumor that they were collecting money. He glanced through the pages, whistling under his breath. This is bigger than I thought, but how do we pin it on Linda? I leaned in. We have her name on multiple documents, plus neighbors who can testify. If you need statements, I can gather them. Rodriguez frowned. We'd need them in writing, and these folks can't be too scared to sign their names. Otherwise, it's just hearsay. A heavy sigh escaped me. My neighbors were terrified of crossing Linda, and I couldn't blame them. For all I knew, she had real power somewhere, or at least powerful friends. I asked Rodriguez about the tinted SUV plates again, hoping there was more to learn. He scanned his computer. It's registered to a private security firm with ties to an out-of-state corporation. Could be some shell company, hard to trace. My shoulders sagged. So basically a dead end. He nodded grimly. I can keep digging, but unless they break the law in a way we can prove, we're stuck. I swallowed my frustration and thanked him, though it felt like I was no closer to stopping Linda. On my way out, my phone buzzed with a text from my supervisor. We need to talk ASAP. Be here first thing tomorrow. My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Maybe the phony community security squad had filed another complaint against me, or Linda had found a new way to sabotage my record. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts whirled with a sense of impending doom, sure that Linda would strike again in some unexpected way. Around 2 a.m., I jolted upright to the sound of a car door slamming outside. I crept to the window and peeked out. A figure stood by the curb looking at my house. For a heartbeat, I worried it was Linda, but the silhouette seemed different, taller and bulkier. After a moment, they climbed back into a vehicle and drove off, leaving me rattled and wide awake. The next morning, I dragged myself to headquarters, bracing for whatever my supervisor had to say. He was waiting by his office door, arms folded, "This is bad," he muttered, ushering me inside. I sat down, my gut tight. "I've got a dozen complaint forms in front of me," he said, dropping a file onto his desk. "All from your neighborhood, all accusing you of misconduct, threats, even property damage." My mouth went dry. "Property damage? That's absurd." He rubbed his temples. "I know, but it's in black and white. Official statements with addresses and signatures." My head spun. Linda had clearly pressured neighbors into signing whatever she wanted them to sign. Now it looked like my entire community was turning against me. The supervisor shook his head. "I believe you when you say this is a setup, but the higher-ups see a pattern. This is going to escalate unless we figure out the truth. And soon." I tried to keep a handle on my anger. "Give me a chance to prove these people are impersonators. They're not recognized by any real authority." He nodded slowly. "All right, but we can't shield you forever." Internal affairs is breathing down my neck. A grim silence settled between us. I thanked him for his patience, knowing time was running out. As I left the office, I fought a surge of desperation. Linda was strangling my career with her cunning moves. At this rate, I'd be fired or put on indefinite leave before I could expose her. I thought about how easily she'd convinced neighbors to file false statements. Fear, bribes, intimidation. Whatever method she used worked, and I was the lone target. By the time I drove home late in the day, I felt emotionally drained. The fake cruiser was back on my street, parked right outside my house with its lights off. I exited my car and approached it, determined to confront them once and for all. A figure rolled down the window just an inch and a harsh voice snarled, "Back off or you'll regret it." My heart hammered, but so did my resolve. Linda's twisted empire of fear had to be dismantled, and I couldn't let her win. My job teetered on the edge and my neighborhood had turned hostile. But I still needed proof that Linda was the puppet master behind these bogus enforcers. The stakes couldn't be higher, and I knew I was heading straight into a confrontation that might cost me everything. I drove to federal headquarters with my pulse hammering, bracing for the worst. My supervisor had warned me about an official inquiry into my so-called misconduct, and I was already running on empty. Weeks of harassment, false reports, and tension with Linda's phony patrol had left me exhausted and on edge. As I walked into the large, echoing lobby, I noticed people giving me wary looks. News of my troubles had spread, and it felt like I was wearing a target. A tight knot formed in my chest as I tried to steady my breathing and remind myself that the truth was on my side. When I reached the conference room, an agent I barely knew opened the door and led me inside. At the long table sat a panel of higher-ups, each wearing a stern expression. My supervisor stood near the back, arms folded, looking grim. An older agent cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the numerous complaints against you. They involve alleged threats to neighborhood authorities and repeated refusals to obey local laws." My heart pounded. "Those authorities are fraudulent," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "Their badges aren't real, and the community board never approved them." One of the panelists, a steely woman, lifted a thick file. "We have statements from at least 10 neighbors claiming otherwise. They say you intimidated them." My blood boiled. "I have documents proving this is a setup. The so-called community security belongs to a private security firm with no legal standing." The panel exchanged glances, but their expressions stayed guarded. Suddenly the door swung open and in walked Linda. She wore a suit, not her usual casual clothes, and carried a sleek briefcase. My mouth fell open in shock. "What is she doing here?" I blurted, my voice raw with disbelief. One of the agents cleared his throat. "Miss Thompson has submitted evidence on behalf of the local enforcement group." My mind spun. So Linda was invited to testify against me in an official federal inquiry. She stepped forward, calm and collected. "Good morning," she said, sounding far too polished. "I represent the interests of our community. I'd like to correct a few misunderstandings." My supervisor shot me a stunned look. He hadn't warned me Linda might appear. For a moment I couldn't speak. Linda opened her briefcase and produced a neat folder. "These files include reports from the Neighborhood Watch," she explained, laying them on the table. "They show repeated noise complaints, suspicious activity, and even a few alleged break-ins linked to this agent's address." I bristled. "That's a lie," I snapped, but she continued without missing a beat. "We asked him many times to cooperate with our volunteer security program, yet he refused, claiming we lacked authority." She let out a delicate sigh. We only wanted to keep our street safe. I stared at the panel, struggling to keep my voice level. Linda is not telling the truth. She started this scheme months ago, frightening neighbors into supporting her. She's using false citations to extort money from them. I've even seen the fake forms. The steely woman on the panel raised a brow. Do you have these forms with you? My heart dropped. Not physically, but I emailed them to. Linda shook her head, feigning disappointment. I'm afraid we have no record of that. Perhaps the agent is confused. My anger surged. She was better prepared than I expected, weaving a story that painted me as a rogue agent. Then came the twist that made my jaw drop. The older agent turned to Linda and said, "Before we proceed, we should disclose your family connection." Linda gave a curt nod. "Yes, of course." She glanced at me with a pitying smile. "My uncle is the deputy director of this bureau. I tried to handle this matter quietly, but when your behavior escalated, I had no choice but to bring it to his attention." My stomach lurched. The deputy director was near the top of our chain of command. If he was her uncle, that explained everything. How she shut down the real community board's lines, how my neighbors felt powerless, and how she'd managed to file official complaints that reached my supervisors so quickly. One panelist cleared his throat. "Given Miss Thompson's connection, we must ensure impartiality, but these claims are serious. Agent, can you provide concrete proof of criminal activity?" My voice wavered. "I have records showing the security firm is unlicensed and neighbors who've told me they're being extorted, but they're too scared to come forward." Linda pressed her lips together. "My family and I care deeply about law and order. We only encourage people to keep our streets safe." Every word dripped with insincerity, and my vision swam, realizing she had deeper roots in the agency itself. I stood alone, cornered by her well-placed influence. The meeting ended with a promise that Internal Affairs would launch a formal investigation, not just of me, but also of any possible wrongdoing in Linda's group. Yet I walked away feeling like I'd lost ground. Linda beamed at me on her way out, murmuring, "Better watch your step." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to shout in front of my superiors. My supervisor jogged after me in the hallway. I had no idea she was related to the deputy director. He muttered, "This puts us in a tight spot. You're not off the hook." I exhaled shakily. "I know." He gave me a sympathetic look. "Do yourself a favor. Stay calm and gather any evidence you can. We'll need more than hearsay." I left the building in a daze, trying to process this shock. Linda's uncle was one of the highest-ranking officers in the Federal Bureau. That meant she had access to connections and resources I never dreamed of. If she could convince my neighbors to back her, what could she do with her uncle's power behind her? My knees felt weak as I reached my car. There was no guarantee Internal Affairs would believe me now, not when Linda had official channels on her side. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white, struggling not to panic. My badge felt heavier than ever in my pocket. Even though I was part of the Federal Bureau, I was fighting an enemy who had the agency's own leadership in her back pocket. My only hope was to expose Linda's private security scam beyond any doubt, but with her family ties and my own reputation on the line, I realized I might have to risk everything, even my career, to bring her down. I drove home from that inquiry feeling like the floor had dropped beneath me. Linda's influence reached the top of the agency, and I was now under an even darker cloud of suspicion. My supervisor tried to assure me we'd figure something out, but his voice held little conviction. Once I pulled into my driveway, I felt every nerve on edge, scanning the street for that fake cruiser or the tinted SUV. It was getting late, and most houses had their lights on, but the road looked empty at first glance. I let out a shaky breath, hoping for one normal night. The second I stepped inside, though, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "They're at my door." I'm scared. My heart pounded. I rushed over to Maria's house on foot, sticking close to the shadows. Sure enough, the so-called community security officers were parked right in front of her place, engine running. As I crept up behind a hedge, I saw them on her porch, pounding on the door. The taller one yelled, "Open up or we'll mark this as another violation." My anger flared. These bullies had gone too far. I cleared my throat loud enough to get their attention. One officer turned, face twisting into a scowl. "You again?" he muttered, grabbing at something on his belt. I held my ground, raising my voice. The suburban enforcer thought I'd found the perfect quiet neighborhood until I encountered Linda. She's the type of person who believes she controls the entire street, complete with her fabricated community regulations and pseudo-security teams acting like they owned the territory. Unfortunately for her, she had no clue who she was dealing with. I'm a federal agent who doesn't tolerate intimidation lightly. What unfolded next caught her completely off guard. I was jolted awake by aggressive banging on my front door, so violent it made my windows vibrate. Still groggy, I rushed to the entrance thinking someone might need emergency help. Peering through the peephole, I spotted two individuals wearing identical outfits with bold lettering reading, Community Security Force. Their badges appeared cheaply made, resembling costume accessories, yet they stood rigidly with intimidating expressions. Opening the door partially, I asked, "How can I assist you?" The larger guard, a man with angular features, gestured toward me. "We're conducting official business. Your residence has several infractions and we must examine your storage area." Irritation surged through me. Infractions? There's nothing in my garage violating any legitimate rules. The smaller guard, a woman with piercing eyes, snapped back, "Don't complicate this. We're authorized by the community board." I noticed they mentioned no warrants or actual police involvement. Calmly, I stated, "I'm a federal agent. If you have valid grounds, present proper documentation." The tall guard smirked. "Being federal doesn't exempt you from neighborhood standards." Behind them, I noticed movement. Linda, my neighbor, peered over their shoulders with a self-satisfied expression. She'd always been domineering and argumentative, nitpicking every minor detail in our area. I immediately knew she'd orchestrated this charade. Content continues with the complete original story. I drove home from that inquiry, feeling like the floor had dropped beneath me. Linda's influence reached the top of the agency, and I was now under an even darker cloud of suspicion. My supervisor tried to assure me we'd figure something out, but his voice held little conviction. Once I pulled into my driveway, I felt every nerve on edge, scanning the street for that fake cruiser or the tinted SUV. It was getting late, and most houses had their lights on, but the road looked empty at first glance. I let out a shaky breath, hoping for one normal night. The second I stepped inside, though, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "They're at my door." I'm scared. My heart pounded. I rushed over to Maria's house on foot, sticking close to the shadows. Sure enough, the so-called community security officers were parked right in front of her place, engine running. As I crept up behind a hedge, I saw them on her porch, pounding on the door. The taller one yelled, "Open up or we'll mark this as another violation." My anger flared. These bullies had gone too far. I cleared my throat loud enough to get their attention. One officer turned, face twisting into a scowl. "You again?" he muttered, grabbing at something on his belt. I held my ground, raising my voice. "Leave her alone. She's done nothing wrong." The female guard stepped closer, her plastic badge catching the porch light. "This doesn't concern you, federal boy. Walk away." My jaw clenched. "It concerns me when you're terrorizing innocent people." Behind the door, I could hear Maria's muffled sobs. These frauds were destroying lives, and Linda was pulling their strings from the shadows. The tall guard produced his fake restraints again. "Final warning. Interfere and we'll arrest you for obstruction." I almost laughed. "With what authority? You're not real law enforcement." That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Linda emerged from the darkness, flanked by two more people I didn't recognize. "Having trouble with our problem neighbor?" she asked sweetly. My blood ran cold. She'd brought reinforcements. 5 against 1, and they all looked ready for confrontation. "This ends now, Linda," I said, trying to project confidence despite being outnumbered. She smiled that same cold smile. "Actually, it's just beginning. My uncle called after your little meeting today. He's very concerned about your erratic behavior." The pieces clicked together. She hadn't just used her connection to get into the inquiry. She was actively working with the deputy director to destroy my career. Every complaint, every false report had been part of a coordinated campaign. "You're finished," she whispered, stepping closer. "By tomorrow, you'll be suspended pending investigation. And once you're out of the way, this neighborhood will run exactly as I want it to." My heart hammered against my ribs. She was right. With her uncle's influence, she could probably get me fired within days. But as I looked at Maria's house, at the other neighbors peeking fearfully through their curtains, I knew I couldn't give up. "Not if I expose you first," I said. Linda laughed. "Expose me? Who's going to believe a disgraced agent over the deputy director's niece?" One of her new recruits stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Want us to handle this?" he asked. Linda held up a hand. "No need. He'll destroy himself soon enough." As they began to disperse, Linda paused beside me. "Enjoy your last night of freedom," she murmured. "Tomorrow you'll understand what real power looks like." I watched them leave, my mind racing. She was right about one thing. Traditional channels wouldn't help me now. But I still had one card to play. If I could get irrefutable evidence of their criminal activity, even her uncle couldn't protect her. I knocked softly on Maria's door. "It's me." "They're gone." She opened it a crack, eyes red with tears. "They said they'd take my house if I don't pay $500 by Friday." My resolve hardened. Linda's greed would be her downfall. "Don't pay anything." "I'm going to stop this." Maria grabbed my arm. "How?" "She has the whole government behind her now." I looked down the street where Linda's house glowed with warm light, knowing she was inside planning her next move. "Sometimes you have to fight dirty to win clean," I said. The real battle was just beginning.